Imagine your family has lived in the same home for generations. You know every creak in the floorboards. Then, one day, a stranger shows up with a piece of paper written in a language you don't speak, claiming they now legally own your house. Suddenly, you face an impossible choice. You can either stay and pay rent to live in your own living room, working for this new landlord, or you can fight to get your home back. That deep, heavy feeling in your gut right now, that sense of complete unfairness, that is exactly what drives long-term conflict. People don't fight because they love violence. They fight when the foundation of their life is pulled out from under them. That stolen house scenario is an exact reflection of reality. Between 1898 and 1941, this precise situation played out in the real world for indigenous peoples and Moro communities in the Philippines. During this time, colonial powers and local elites wrote new property laws. These new rules completely ignored the traditional ways local communities had shared and managed their land for centuries. Before foreign laws arrived, communities had established systems. Life was built around these thatched roof villages and shared spaces, operating peacefully under local agreements. When the new laws took effect, people who had always been self-sufficient suddenly found themselves legally landless. They were forced into poverty, working on someone else's farm just to survive on the very soil their ancestors cultivated. This era of land dispossession created a friction that still burns today. The modern struggles we see in places like Mindanao are a direct inheritance from this period of stolen livelihoods and ignored sovereignty. When you strip entire communities of their resources, pushback is inevitable. Farmers began to organize, forming peasant movements to defend their basic rights to the earth they stood on. Over the decades, those initial protests grew into organized armed resistance. What started as local disputes evolved into one of the longest-running insurgencies in Asia, lasting over 50 years and costing tens of thousands of lives. The scars of this conflict remain most visible in specific hotspots today, particularly across Samar, Negros, and Davao City. These regions are some of the most remote and underdeveloped in the country. The lack of infrastructure and economic growth there today is a direct result of those century-old land policies that left local communities behind. The ongoing clashes in these forests and mountains are the visible symptoms of a disease that was never treated, a failure to answer those original questions about who truly owns the land. For a long time, the government tried to solve this unrest with military force. A clear example of this is the year 2000, when a massive all-out war was declared against armed groups in Mindanao. The army successfully captured key rebel camps, but clearing out a camp doesn't erase a grievance. Because the root issues were ignored, the armed resistance simply regrouped in new locations. Meanwhile, the intense fighting forced thousands of innocent families to flee their homes. All the military campaign really accomplished was driving a deeper wedge of anger and mistrust between the state and local Moro communities. Even years later, pouring troops into these areas kept things on a knife's edge. This volatility became tragically clear in 2015, during an event known as the Mama Sapano incident. In Mama Sapano, a breakdown in communication and poor coordination led two heavily armed groups into a tragic encounter. During a sensitive peace process, these operational failures resulted in a disaster that cost lives on all sides. Trying to shoot your way out of a century-old property dispute is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. It doesn't fix the fracture, and the rough handling usually causes even more damage. So, if forcing your rules on people doesn't work, and sending in the military only makes things worse, how do you actually fix the problem? The first step is acknowledging that one size does not fit all. The government has to stop forcing a single rigid system onto diverse communities and start respecting local, traditional ways of managing land and governance. Second, you have to bring the people who actually lost their homes to the negotiating table. True peacebuilding means pulling the most marginalized voices out of the background and putting them front and center. A massive part of that is ensuring women are active leaders in the peace process. If peace talks only involve men with guns negotiating ceasefires, the focus stays on the military. When women are included, the conversation naturally shifts to rebuilding schools, securing healthcare, and creating the daily stability that communities need to actually thrive. You cannot sustain a peaceful society with signatures from a few generals. You need the active, daily participation of the mothers, farmers, and local leaders who understand what their neighborhoods actually need. Let's go back to that stolen house we talked about at the beginning. If you want to make things right, you cannot just apologize and keep collecting the rent. You have to tear up the unfair contract that caused the problem in the first place. Real progress happens when local communities receive the legal power to control their own resources and shape their own future, correcting the mistakes of past governments. We see this working in reality through historic agreements, like the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It is what happens when the national government and local representatives finally sit at the same table as equals. A lasting peace in the Philippines will never come from the barrel of a gun. It comes from patient, inclusive conversations that allow everyone involved to sit down, look at the land, and draw the new blueprints together.